reading and writing, and how you can teach these subjects in fun, engaging ways through hands-on food and garden activities. When we consider subjects that can be taught through hands-on food and gardening activities, we tend to think of math and science first because maybe they're the most obvious, with the science behind cooking and growing plants and the math and measuring, counting, etc. So we're here to tell you today that you can also teach reading and writing lessons using local foods that you buy or grow in your own garden. So our agenda for today, we're going to start with the foundational building blocks of language and the foundational building blocks of reading and writing. And we'll work our way through and up, increasing complexity to eventually arriving to reading comprehension and writing. And all of these lessons that we share with you today can be scaled up or down for all levels of learners. So my name's Kimberly Kugler. If you don't already know, I'm the Farm to School Coordinator at Georgia Organics, and I will let Jenna introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jenna Mobley. I'm an early childhood educator. My degree is in early childhood education. My minor is in English as a second language. So I am really excited about talking more about language and how language has a role in the work that we do with our kids in the kitchen and in the garden classroom. So we'd love to know a little bit about who's here. This is a great workshop for not only teachers, but any parents or tutors or pod leaders, caregivers that will be working with children of all ages. We're interested today in what grade level you will primarily be teaching coming up in this next semester. So you'll see a poll pop up and you'll have options of early care where maybe we're learning the letters and knowledge of the alphabet, some print concepts, maybe some in K through 2 where we're learning to read, others in 3 through 5 where we're reading to learn, and then 6 through 8 where we're doing some more advanced reading and writing. I'd love to get some responses on here from almost everyone so we can sort of gear our presentation towards the folks that are in the room today. All right, we have about 10 out of 15 responded. We'll give a couple more seconds and see who else we have. About 3 more. All right, great. So we have a lot of kindergarten through 2nd, a couple of early care, and a couple 3 through 5. So we'll focus in on those sort of standards and those ideas today. There will be slides in the presentation that will reach all of these different levels that you guys can check out. But this is where we'll sort of gear our conversation today. And as always in the chat, please jump in with any ideas that you have about this worked really well for me. You should try this. This is a great book. Here's where you find these awesome poems. I love doing this writing activity because I know that all of you guys are experts on your kids and you have a lot of experience on teaching reading and writing and language to your kids. And I would love to see all of those ideas. Oftentimes the best ideas come from the chat more than the facilitator in a lot of the workshops that I go to. So let's keep those active as we move on, and I will do my role of just starting the conversations and asking the questions and bringing up the topics, and we'll see what comes out from there.
Okay, so what is Farm to School? In a nutshell, it is using locally grown foods to both feed and teach. And you can get locally grown foods by purchasing them, obviously, from a local farmer or food supplier in your community, or by growing them yourself. And if you do grow them yourself, then that in itself is another wellspring of learning opportunities for you and your students. Farm to School is also cooking and tasting locally grown foods and learning about and through locally grown foods and food producers. Hands-on activities like cooking, taste testing, and gardening engage students in different learning modalities and are fun ways for students to learn the education standards that they need to learn anyway. Sorry, I think I was muted for a second. As well as learn about the real impact of their food choices on their health, their community, and the local economy. And taking your students on a field trip to a local farm to meet the farmer and to see and learn about how they grow their product is also farm to school and an important real life connection that some people don't ever get to make. So to drive this home, the best farm to school programs include eating local foods, learning about and through local foods, and learning about how they're grown and engaging with the community around local foods.
All right, so again, we're looking here at why we would choose to teach through local foods and choose to teach all of our different standards, whether they're science or math or literacy, through local foods like Kimberly was just mentioning. And today we're really going to focus in on this academic part about how the academics of your classroom, these Common Core standards or your GELD standards, how these can be taught best through hands-on experiential learning with real food out in the fresh air and doing that hands-on experiences together with their class. Now, you may have noticed in some of our different webinars that we start often with a daily poem. And this is something I do in my real class, so something I brought over to my webinars as well. And I think this is a great way to bring all of the energy together, especially around the time that we're in right now. This is a seasonal poem from one of the books I have called When Green Becomes Tomatoes. And this one is actually for January. So in my last webinar, I had one for December, and I wanted to make sure I gave you one for January so that you had some to do with your kids in the coming months. So we'll have Kimberly read this one for us today.
I love this poem, and it actually just snow flurried here the other night, so it's appropriate. I would not mind at all to fall if I could fall like snowflakes, more drift and swirl than tumble thump, more gentle float than ouch and bump. The most perfect way of all to fall is to fall and fall like snowflakes.
Perfect. Thank you, Kimberly. I love starting with poetry like this because it is such a good reminder of the time and space that we're in, but also in the type of work that we're going to be doing in the garden or kitchen space. The type of work of being curious and asking questions and being creative and collaborative. Poetry is all of those things. Here's a lot of the different books of seasonal poems that I have. This is also one example of how literature and literacy can be part of our daily routines. And we'll be talking a lot today about how we can incorporate literacy into what we do every day and creating a language-rich environment that the kids are a part of every single day. And then we'll also teach some very specific lessons that you'll do one time with your class. But I wanted to make sure I included lots of these ideas that you can incorporate as part of the way that you do garden and cooking with your kids. So let's get started with the very foundations of language. I saw we have quite a few early care teachers in here with us today. So you'll see a lot of these GELD standards. We're going to talk about some different ideas for identifying letters and sorting things in letter order, as well as those letter sounds. Then we'll take the next step into blending those letter sounds into syllables, and then we'll go a little further into talking about strategies for building up vocabulary and parts of speech. So first, one of the first things we do with kids is we start to identify letters. And we start to identify them in the order of the letters. Like, so some of these books here that you see on the left are great for identifying the letters in order. And these are all garden themed. There's a lot of different ones to choose from. This is a vegetable one, a bug book, and a tree book that's here. And then after we get comfortable with the letters in order, it's really fun for kids to go out into their environment and then try to find these letter shapes that they have identified in the books. So that is one of many reasons why it's so important to have labels in our garden so that the kids can be part of this language-rich environment with language and words everywhere. And maybe your labels even have two languages, the two most commonly spoken languages. And they can be on plants, they can be on garden tools, but including words everywhere can be a way for kids to identify those letters in real life. And then for putting different objects in ABC order or letter order, we did this in one of our previous webinars, so we won't model it today, but I put this little image of seed packets on here because seed packets is one of our favorite things to use for ABC order. And the strategy for kids is to sing the ABC song. And as they see those letters, as they go through the alphabet, to put them in order the way that they go through the alphabet. And then we can also find that that's a very useful skill for kids, you know, especially with this hands-on learning that we're doing. We always want to have a meaningful why. Why are you doing this task? To show that you can do ABC order? Sure. But also the other reason is that now all of our seed packets are organized in a way where we can find them quickly. So that when spring comes around and you are looking for those Sugar Snap pea seeds, you can go to the back near the S's and find them immediately, rather than having them all stirred about. There was also a lesson about identifying these letter and letter sounds in the Turn Up the Volume resources. So the book we used for that is called Eating the Alphabet. And the activity looks like this here on the right of the screen. It's a word wall where for every different food that the kid might taste in the cafeteria or in snack or at home, they can say that word out loud, like corn, identify that first sound, k, and then identify which letter that matches with. Now for a sound like k, there are two options. It could be a C or a K, and this one would be a C. So they could either write or draw in that C box that they ate corn. Now, something else that's special about this activity is that it really encourages eating variety, which is something we are always talking about at Georgia Organics, is not only how do we encourage kids to enjoy eating fruits and vegetables, but how do we encourage them to eat a variety of fruits and vegetables? And it's activities like these where they can fill in the blanks all across the alphabet that encourages them to try something brand new so they can fill in a brand new blank while they're practicing their phonics. So once we have the letter sounds, then we can start blending the sounds together. So I don't know if anyone here does Saxon phonics, but I'm a little bit of a Saxon phonics nerd, so we'll do a little bit of these phonics lessons here, where we can take each of the sounds of a word or a syllable and then blend them together. So I'm going to take the screen share off for just a minute so I can show you what this will look like. All right, so if you're on speaker view here, you should be able to see me. And if we're doing a word like bat, maybe we're studying bats and how important they are for our garden, then we would separate that by the sounds b, a, t, and then put it together, bat, b, a, t, bat. And that's the same process we're going to go through for these next sounds that we are going to blend. And all of these sounds come from the book Bird Songs. So part of what I love about these activities is we're also learning the sounds and the songs of birds in our neighborhood. So for example here, this is a robin. We see robins at our school all the time. We have an ongoing tally chart of all the robins that we see in our school garden. And in the book here, it shows the sound that the robin makes. So with the kids, you could do each sound individually. T, t, and then all together, tut. And that's the sound that the robin makes, is that tut, 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 tut. That's what you'll hear. When you get more advanced into phonics, we start looking at digraphs, which are two letters that combine to make one sound. And this book has some of those too. So if you look here on the right, this is our state bird in the state of Georgia, the thrasher. And the thrasher makes a chuck sound. So with kids, we have two different digraphs here, which means we only have three sounds. So we have ch, k, and then it can be combined to chuck. And that's the sound that the thrasher makes, the chuck, chuck. And then we have vowel digraphs where two vowels come together to make one sound. And these are some of our other common birds. The crow is probably one of the most common where I am in Atlanta, and it's something that we can recognize really quickly. So you have that caw sound for the crow here. The kids love this activity. It is phonics, but they are also learning a lot about all of the birds in their neighborhood and how to identify all of those birds. And then we're going to take all of those phonetic sounds and put them into syllables. So this is breaking words up into these smaller units of pronunciation, each with a vowel. So you can see the examples I use with my kids here. We have banana, and they can snap with it, or watermelon. And using that sort of snap and rhythm to separate those vowels is a good way to be able to tell how many syllables a word has. Syllables are also the units of rhythm in our language. So this is a fun lesson that you can do in collaboration with a music teacher at your school, where you can turn the syllables into music notes or music rhythms. So of course, a pair is just one syllable or one note. But then apple is two syllables or two notes or eighth notes, or cherry. And you can do these with all of your local foods to build that sort of rhythmic understanding of language. Okay, so let's use these syllables to create some poetry together. So this is a model for a haiku. A haiku is a type of poetry that is originally from Japan, and traditionally, haikus always have a seasonal reference. They have what they call a kaigo, or a seasonal reference in them. So today we are going to write a haiku about winter, the season that we are in, or very close to being in. So before we write our haikus independently, let's read this one that I found about broccoli together. And when we're practicing counting these syllables, of course we can do it with our snaps. That's a really easy way to figure out how many syllables there are. But when we're counting syllables, sometimes I add my fingers. Can you see me in a small box there on the side where I'm adding my fingers? So for each syllable that we read here on the broccoli poem, we're going to add our fingers so we can count how many syllables are in each line. So for this one, if you want to stay on mute but read it with me, that's broccoli so green, that's 5 syllables. Sauteed, roasted, steamed, or raw, 7 syllables. Anyway, tasty, and that's 5 syllables. So that's a haiku about broccoli that has 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. Now we're each going to write our own haiku about winter. And this takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of playing around to get a phrase that has the right number of syllables. And when you have it, I'd love to see it in the chat box. But I'm going to give you a little clue about how to write it into the chat box. When I do this with kids, oftentimes they press enter after each line of their haiku. And so their haiku gets separated and then it's hard to see. So instead, what we can do is we can do a backslash between our lines. So I'll give an example here in the chat box. And of course, this is not a haiku, but this is the format. And that is what it looks like to put those slashes between each of your phrases. So let's take a quiet minute and see if we can each write a haiku about anything that has to do with winter. And we'll share out. Write them in the chat box when you're ready, and then we'll share out when we're done. Okay, take another minute. I know this is a little bit harder than it seems. And of course, this is an activity we give children like 30 minutes to do. Mariah, would you like to come off mute and read your haiku to everyone?
Sure. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, awesome. So my haiku is, winter time is here. Can you believe it is near? Winter time is here.
I love it. Let's give her some snaps. Nice work. And if you can
Thank
see,
you.
I was counting out the syllables on my fingers. That's such a good strategy for kids. Let's see. Jessica, are you interested in coming off mute and sharing yours?
Sure. Let me find it. Here we go. The trees are now bare. The pollinators are few. Winter, you are here.
Nice work, Jessica. We can give her some snaps. All right, let's do one more. Whoever is interested, let's see, we have Sandra's, Kim's, Lori's, Bridget's that you can read in the chat. Would anyone like to volunteer to be the last one to read a haiku today?
I'll give it a try.
All right, let's hear it, Bridget.
I said carrots for winter. Yep, carrots for winter, steamed raw or juicy juices. It's good for you.
Yeah.
Okay, I missed the last one.
I think that's right. It is good for you. Oh yeah, just it is instead of
Oh,
it.
it is good for you. Okay.
Nice work, Bridget. These are great. Awesome job. If y'all have not finished yet, please feel free to continue to add those. Oh, thank you for adding yours, Antoinette. I know I did these so quickly, but these are beautiful poems, and you can see what a meaningful activity this is for kids. You know, oftentimes we give them a worksheet that says, fill in the blank. Tell me how many syllables are in this word or in this phrase. And, you know, that doesn't have quite as much meaning as writing a poem and practicing those syllables in a way to share something about the seasons. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those. All right, so we've learned about letters and then the letter sounds, and we put them all into syllables. We've started to string them into words and phrases. And so next we're going to talk a little bit about building vocabulary and what we can do in our kitchen and garden classrooms to create, again, this language-rich environment where we're constantly building vocabulary. So one of the strategies is to have a word wall. Now here you can see a pretty typical word wall. A word wall is just a display of a bunch of words. And oftentimes in classrooms, they are organized by the letters of the alphabet. But in our kitchen and garden classrooms, we can usually create different scaffolds for this language to be even more accessible for our kids. So I'll show you a couple of different examples here. One thing that we can do in our kitchen and garden classrooms is include a photo with the label or an illustration with a label, or we can put the labels on the actual tools or on the place where the tools are held. And so this attaches meaning not only to what this word is or what the letters look like, but what that means. We can also sort our word walls into groups so that they have even further meaning or even give instructions. So like this is one that we have for our compost ingredients right over our compost bin. Is here's what we can put in our compost bins, and the kids are now learning which ones are browns and which ones are greens and how we can balance both of those. We also have a word wall for all of the different vegetables we eat. And this is a word wall that I used to have organized by the letters of the alphabet for a long time. For like 6 years, we had it organized by the letters of the alphabet. And that was pretty fun. And I think that's a fun way to encourage those beginning sounds and learning about those. But with my kids, I thought I could take it a step further and create more meaning out of this display. So now we organize our word wall by the highest vitamin that is present in that fruit or vegetable that we eat. And so this was inspired by this book, Good Enough to Eat. They have a chart that's very similar here. And I really love that this encourages kids to eat a variety and has that added meaning of all of these different vitamins and nutrients that you get when you eat that variety. So that's a fun way to organize that sort of word wall. In our kitchen classroom, we used to have one big word wall that was all the kitchen nouns. It was all the things in the kitchen. And we have since organized these and separated them out a little bit more. So here's another example of how you can make a word wall even more accessible and more meaningful. So we have on the left side, the washing tools. And so if a student is assigned to wash a vegetable, they can look specifically in this area and see a picture and see the word for each of these different tools they may be using for washing. And same thing with cutting. This ensures that we are all speaking the same language. If I ask for a student to please go get me a wavy cutter, if they don't know what I'm referring to, they can look right up here, find the wavy cutter, and find something that looks just like it. And similarly, in the kitchen, we have kitchen verbs. These are all the things we do in the kitchen. These are, we're going to stir, and we're going to taste, and we're going to spread, we're going to slice. These are what we're going to do. The kitchen is really a great place to start these sort of conversations about parts of speech. We have these scaffolds on the walls all the time, and the kids refer back to them regularly, and it helps them get this grasp on what a noun is. The verb is everything we're going to do, and then after we taste it, the adjective, those are the three main parts of speech. The adjective is how we describe what we tasted. So for our younger kids, usually we have just maybe 4 words on this word wall for the adjectives. For everything we taste, we decide if it's more sweet or salty or bitter or sour. And of course, again here, I have the images that give an idea of what that word means. And then when we get into the higher grades, we can add more to this word wall. And this word wall can get so long. I have kids that look through newspaper articles, reviews for restaurants, and pull out the different tasting adjectives. And so we have just like hundreds of things on our list of words that describe food, but we've again sorted these a little bit further out. So we have our list of texture words and taste words, so that we're creating these sort of buckets or scaffolds in our students' minds that holds all of that language that is specific to that certain activity or that certain experience that we're having together. And a fun activity that's sort of tying all of this together, from our knowledge of letters all the way to our parts of speech, is to make an acrostic poem like this. We did this in our very earliest Turn Up the Volume lesson plan, and the lesson plan is still available in those resources. But this is where students would taste together, let's say taste a turnip together, and they would identify, maybe off of a word wall like you see here, which adjectives match, and see if they can fill in their acrostic poem with matching adjectives. Now that's actually pretty hard, even when you are using all the adjectives for tasting and texture and look. So that's a great opportunity to start teaching adverbs, which is getting a little bit more advanced into language and parts of speech. And so adverbs, you can see the word wall here on the right, have a lot of other words, like they are often this, they are perfectly this, they're usually this, they're very this, purple. And that gives so much more language to use for this activity. And it's such a good example of how these adverbs can enhance all of our language. All right, so that's sort of the foundations of language and building words. Let's get on to the foundations of reading and writing. And this is where it really gets fun, because the foundations of reading and writing are really around our oral communication with kids, how we talk to each other and how we can read together or echo read, and how we can use rhythm and rhyme, repetition, music, movement, all of these things orally to build this understanding of reading and writing before we are digging through chapter books and putting pen to paper necessarily. So one of the foundational pieces of this is learning about different types of sentences, learning the difference between a command and a question and a declarative sentence and an interrogative sentence. And one of the things I wanted to remind y'all on here today for the commands is, and we talked about this a little bit in our hands-on cooking webinar, is about the importance of our verbal language to our students, especially our early learners, and especially our students that are learning English as a second language. Oftentimes as teachers, and I'm very guilty of this, we can rattle on and on and on and say, well, okay, so first I want you to go, you're gonna get this, and you're gonna get this, and then you're gonna do this, and you're gonna wash them really good, and make sure you get the underside of this, oh, and don't get water on the table, and then you're gonna get this towel, and you're gonna do, and we have this long string of words, and then we're surprised when the kids can't follow all of these instructions and these fast rattled off sort of directions. And to make language more accessible for students, we can use simple sentence structures like the one you can see here. And we can use these sort of models, like the one you see here, to break sentences down. Instead of writing on the board a complete sentence that says, group 1 will wash the turnips with the colander, what you can do instead is use these pictures. So we might use one word, our verb, and then use a picture of the turnip and a picture of the tool. So thinking about ways to make language more accessible for all of your learners, whether they're early learners or learning English as a second language. We're going to do an activity in a little bit to talk about asking questions. And this is one of my favorite lessons. The types of sentences lesson is not always the most fun to teach when you're a first and second grade teacher, but questions and asking questions are so important to the way we think about the world around us. And I think it's important to remember how often in school, kids are used to having just like a right or wrong answer, and they're used to being told what to do and that here's the right answer. But giving kids a chance to practice asking questions builds curiosity about the world around them. And we'll practice some of this in a little bit as a way to practice the language arts concept of what questions are, that end with question marks, and identifying questions, but also as a way to build curiosity about the world around us. All right, so we're going to do some reading together to demonstrate some of these different ways that we can read together before necessarily kids are sitting down and reading a book all by themselves. There's a lot that we can do in the kitchen and garden classroom to support that language development. We can do some echo reading where the teacher reads and then the student reads, the teacher reads, the student echoes. We can do some choral reading where we're all reading together. And then eventually we are moving towards independent reading of these same texts that we've practiced. So let's try out echo reading. So for this one, we will ask you to stay on mute to avoid the cacophony, but I will demonstrate how the teacher will say the phrase in a rhythm, and then the student, you guys, will repeat that phrase in the rhythm. So we'll go through this first. This is sort of like our first step. This would be like a great one for early care. And then I'll sort of pull back the curtain on some of the reasons why this is such a great practice for building comfort with language in the classroom. So if you can see the poem up here, you'll just repeat after me. And I'm going to clap along with it so we keep a rhythm. Purple is a grape. Purple is a grape. Purple is a plum. Purple is a plum. Purple is a turnip top. Purple is a turnip top. The bruise on my thumb and the bruise on my thumb. Nice job. So the reason that this works, even with our youngest learners, is because the phrases are very short and we have these repetitive phrases at the beginning. And so for a young learner who is learning how to learn a poem all by themselves and be able to read it independently all by themselves, having this sort of frame of purple is a purple is a purple is a, gives them that sort of frame to fill out. And then also, this is why rhymes are important, is because rhymes lower down the options of what can go in that next sentence. So if we just said, purple is a plum, then when we're thinking through, what was it that she said? What was that last thing that was purple? Oh yeah, purple is the bruise on my thumb. It matches. So it gives them more scaffolds to fill in those sort of blanks and be able to learn those poems. That rhythm helps a lot too, is because even if they're having a hard time grasping the language, they might get the sound of it, and they can do at least those parts of it as they're adding those sort of syllables. You could do something with maybe something a little more complex. This would be like our step 2. And you could add motions to this. You might have seen in one of our previous webinars, there's motions to all of these. And again, we're doing the same sort of rhythm. Your eyes help you see, your lungs help you. And if you couldn't remember and you weren't looking at it, but you just said see, what do your lungs do? Oh, breathe. See how it's a clue and a scaffold for what comes next to help kids get that idea of language. Now, this is a more advanced example of echo reading. So we've done an easier one, a little bit of a longer phrase, and now this is a more advanced one. And this is one I use to teach about commas, actually, and about how we pause for commas. So this one's a little bit harder of an echo read, but let's try it and see what it feels like to mimic this sort of longer phrases of language. So this one goes, he tries every new thing, at least one small bite. So you can try that too. He tries every new thing, at least one small bite. Good. And the next phrase, he is brave, adventurous, and always polite. He is brave, adventurous, and always polite. Yeah. So if you notice, there was a rest where all of those commas go. And so part of learning this sort of rhythm of language and mimicking this rhythm of language is learning how punctuation plays a part in it. And of course, this is a little rhyme that we do often right before we taste new food to encourage kids to taste new food, which helps, but can also be turned into a language arts lesson when we're talking about that punctuation. This is a choral reading piece that we could do. We've done this in almost every webinar, I feel like, so we'll skip past it for right now. But of course, for any of these things that you've repeated enough times, they can then be read together all at the same time. And speaking of the role of repetition, there are lots of different songs that have these repeated pieces, or books that have these repeated pieces that give kids the confidence to jump in. So we talked about this one last week, last week. We did decomposition, decomposition. And after kids have said decomposition, after they've said that 20 times, even though it's a big word with a lot of syllables, it's a mouthful, those kids got that word. And then if they switch groups and they were the group that goes, I get down, I break down, then not only can they say the word decomposition because they've done it so many times, but they can also know what it means because we're building this language with repetition. You guys have also seen the Up, Down, and Around book in these webinars. This is not only a great book for repeating because it constantly has these different phrases that are corn grows up, beets grow down, beans wind around and around. This grows up, that grows down, something winds around and around, over and over again. So they can repeat those phrases and it has the kinesthetic movements with it. This is also a great way to learn prepositions. So prepositions along with adverbs are some of these more advanced parts of speech skills. This is a great book to use to learn those words like up, down, around, over, under. Really fun lessons in the garden to do with prepositions. You guys have seen this before, different phrases in the book, like having repeated phrases, even if it's not the whole book, every once in a while, to do add it to the pot and let it all rot for compost stew. Kids love that one. And I wanted to show you one of my favorites today called Jack's Garden. So Jack's Garden is a book. Make sure I'm on speaker view so you can see this one here. Jack's Garden is a book that builds on itself and it has repeated phrases. So by the end of it, you can probably join in on this book with me. I'll do just a little bit of it so you can get a sense for it. This is the garden that Jack planted. This is the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. These are the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. This is the rain that wet the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. Okay, and then it keeps going. It goes to the seedlings and the plants and the birds. And at the very end, we skip forward. These are the birds that chase the insects, that sip nectar from the flowers, that blossom from the buds, that formed on the plants, that grew from the seedlings, that sprouted with the rain, that wet the seeds that fell on the soil, that made up the garden that Jack planted. And this is the garden that Jack planted. So that's a really fun book about a garden that repeats like that. And we actually make a book as a class that's very similar. So we take the same words, except for we say, this is the garden that we planted. And this is the soil that made up the garden that we planted. But we take pictures of us working with our soil in our garden, with our compost bins. And then these are the seeds, and we take pictures of us planting our seeds. And it's a nice end of the year project to be able to use that same text that kids are familiar with, but have pictures of their year through the garden. That's a really fun one. All right, let's go back to our screen here. Of course, we're running out of time pretty quickly, so I'm going to show you just briefly some of these examples of how music and movement can play a role in learning vocabulary. So this is a perfect example. This is the Roots, Stems, Leaves, Flowers, Fruits, and Seeds song. And when kids sing that song and do those motions enough, roots, stems, leaves, flowers, fruits, and seeds, roots, stems, leaves, flowers, fruits, and seeds, then they will never forget what the parts of the plants are. I still see kids that were in my kindergarten class that are now like in high school, and they will still, I'll be like, what are the parts of plants? And they're like, roots, stems, leaves, flowers, fruits, and seeds. And they never leave one out because they know the whole song and they know them in that order. So that's a really fun way to use music and movement to not only be able to repeat language, but build that sort of meaning into language. And of course, there's a lot of ways that we communicate as a community, not just orally, but also with sign language. So I've included some guides here to do sign language for some of our favorite songs. For this one, I love that strawberry taste. This is one of our favorite ones to do, the sign language too. It's pretty advanced, but these are all, and I like to tell my kids too, these are all real signs. These are real ways to communicate with folks. These aren't just motions and dances that I made up. Many of them are when we're making up motions, but this is a way to communicate. And this is very important to kids to know that they are doing the real way to do sign language to these songs. All right, let's talk a little bit about reading and selecting the perfect book for kids. One thing we want to keep in mind is what reading level we are offering to our kids. Now, I love this book. I wanted to point this out because this is a wordless book. And it's a great reminder that our kids can read without being able to read the words on a page. They can read the pictures and tell their own stories all day long. And that's a really fun way for them to be exposed to new ideas. But then, of course, when you are teaching any sort of topic, you can select books on all different reading levels because all students should be exposed to literature that is at all different levels, regardless of where their accelerated reader test is or anything like that. So these are just 3 examples of what 3 winter solstice books look like on the inside, maybe like a 3rd grade level, a 5th grade, and then a chapter book for middle school, but all of these would be included and accessible to all of our children. Also remember to include lots of different types of texts. So we want to have not only these informational texts that we usually lean on in the kitchen and the garden. They are books about how carrots grow, the life cycle of a strawberry, genetics of a pea, or whatever the topic is. We lean heavily on these informational texts. But there are also so many beautiful literature pieces about food and what food means to us and who food has impacted, and these biographies and these folk tales and legends around food and poetry around food and seasons. So here I have a couple of examples of what this might look like. It's pairing an informational text, like From Bean to Bean Plant, with a fairy tale, like Jack and the Beanstalk. Here's another example with worms. For strawberries, we have an informational text about seed to strawberry, but we also included a Cherokee legend, which is one of our social studies standards as well. For butterflies, we have not only informational, real photographs, lots of facts, but we have poetry and a biography about someone that was drawing butterflies. It's a really beautiful book. Now, there's another important thing to consider when you're thinking about children's literature, and I want you to think on your own for a minute of how you would choose between these 4 books. All of these books are books that are about finding a quiet place outside, taking deep breaths in the fresh air, taking in everything around you. These are the books that I have for teaching kids about that quiet moment before we start our lesson. But there's an important reason why I would pick one over another. So take a moment to take a look at these, and then we'll talk about it together. Okay, one of the other important considerations for books that's beyond the topic and the reading level and the length and the type of text that you're reading is the importance of representation in the books that you are using with your children. So there was a study done in 2015 that showed that 73% of children's books represented white children. And so our white children were the ones that saw themselves represented in all of the books that were being presented in class, presumably, where many of our other children did not see themselves reflected in those books. And similarly, with these examples that I showed you, only one of them, 1/4 of them, represented a non-white child. These are important things for us to remember, because when we are reading a text where we are represented, that is an opportunity for us to build validation for our own experiences, and we can build an understanding, and we can clearly see through connections to ourselves. And all of our children deserve the opportunity to have their existence validated and their lived experiences validated in that way, to build that positive identity development for themselves. They all should be able to see themselves as a mirror. Now, there also is a role for what we call a window book. There's mirrors and windows. And a window book is one where we're looking out on another perspective, and we're gaining a new perspective that's not similar to our own. It does not reflect us. And all of our children deserve the opportunity to see that as well, a balance of both perspectives. This is particularly important when we talk about the single story, and we just came out of Thanksgiving time, is when we're asking ourselves questions and asking our students questions and telling stories about Thanksgiving, we want to make sure that we are not continuing to tell the same single story that's held by the dominant culture, but offering lots of different perspectives. And so one way that we can do that is encouraging that we have representation in the children that are seen as the characters in our books, and in the authors and the perspectives that are told in our books. Always remember that when you're looking through the text, oftentimes in gardening and cooking, the text will only include the fruit or vegetable, but sometimes they will include characters, and we want to be cognizant of which characters we are showing our kids. Likewise, it is great when we can include other languages in any of our texts. So the Carrot Seed is a book that I use often with my kids, and oftentimes because I can send home the Spanish version with those students that speak Spanish, so that family can connect around that same text that we used in the classroom, and that child can feel that their native language is as valued as the one that we are using in the classroom. Of course, not every book is available in both English and Spanish, but when that is an option, that is a great option to go for, so that students can see those other languages and have exposure to them. All right, so let's do a quick activity about types of text. And it won't be obvious at first why this has anything to do with types of text, but hang in there with me. All right, so make sure that I am on speaker view. And today we are going to be looking at these carrots together. All right, we're gonna pretend they're growing in a garden, but of course we're not currently in a garden. But here we are with our carrots in our make-believe garden. And now with these carrots, we can look at these carrots in a lot of different ways and ask a lot of different questions about these carrots. So in the chat box, we're going to practice writing questions. We sort of alluded to this earlier, questions that end in question marks. This is surprisingly hard sometimes. And we're going to try to ask questions from different perspectives, getting the idea that there's so many different ways to look at any single thing. So let's start with, okay, here's my apron. What if I was a chef? What questions would I ask about these carrots? If I was a chef, what would I want to know about these carrots? What do you think? Jot it down in the chat box. Yeah, how sweet are they? What might they taste like? When do you harvest them? Oh yeah, can you make something with these green carrot tops? How fresh are they? Yeah, if I was the chef, those are the types of questions I might ask. What if I was a historian? Hold on, let me get on my beard. There we go. Almost got it. Oh. Okay. What if I was a historian? Can you guys still hear me through my beard? What questions might I want to know about this? About these carrots? I might look at these carrots and think something totally different. Yeah, where do they originate from? Who first planted them? Yeah, are they heirloom? How old are they? Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, now what if, oh, I should have done this in a different order. Okay, What if I was an animal? I might just have to hold them up like that. If I was an animal, what would I want to know about these carrots? What sort of questions might I ask about these if I saw them growing out in a school garden? If I was an animal like a deer. Oh yeah, do we eat them? Are they poisonous? Yeah. How do you get them out? Yeah. Can I eat them? Good. What if I was a scientist? What might I want to know? Oh, my eye looks really funny like that. What might I want to know about a carrot if I was a scientist? Why are they orange? Yeah, how do they grow? What vitamins do they contain? Why are some purple? Nice job. So in the same way, look, got some fake beard in my mouth. In the same way that all of these different people could ask different questions and wonder different things about carrots, we can read books from authors that thought different ways about carrots. So one of these books is an informational text. Another one is a literary text. And we can tell just from looking at the covers. This one has real photographs. And this one has illustrations. And this one looks like it has a character in it. So this might be our literacy text. Now, when we're reading literature, we could read through and we would notice that there's characters and there's dialogue. And he's afraid he won't come up, and his big brother's being kind of mean in it. There's a beginning, middle, and end. There's a plot to this book. And then we could read through this book to understand the difference in these types of texts and informational texts. This one has photos with captions. Oh, it started with a table of contents. And at the end, oh, that's my favorite picture right there. So good. At the end, it has some of our vocabulary and our index. So these are features of informational text, an easy way to teach the difference in the types of text. But we could go even further and then have our kids look at something outside in the garden, like this apple that I have here today, and say, you know what, you're going to practice this in groups of 3. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what this might look like with kids. In groups of 3, or 4, you're each going to look at this same apple plant or whatever plant is in your garden, apple tree, and write about it in different ways. So one student could write a narrative about this apple. It could be, the character could be an apple. The character could be a little boy, it could be themselves. And this narrative might start with like once upon a time and might have a beginning, a middle, and end, maybe a problem and a solution. This is narrative writing about this apple. But then another student in that same group is going to write something informational about this apple. Same topic, but a very different type of writing. And so this is going to include a main idea, some details, some facts, observable traits, and then a conclusion at the end. Now, a lot of times my teachers will say, oh, well, we don't have a computer lab. How are they going to do their research? I don't let them use their phones. And I just encourage my kids to only use observable traits when they do this. It is great when you can do research and build out this project a little bit further, but observable traits totally work. And then the third one is persuasive writing. So that student is going to come up with an opinion about this apple, and they're going to back it up with some reasons. They're going to say, I think that apples need to be on the cafeteria line because they are beautiful and delicious and good for you. And maybe they can do more robust writing than that, but something like that works for their persuasive writing. And they can also write a letter about an apple to anyone they want that has something to do with an apple. And so this is a way to practice with kids all of these different types of nuanced writing, ways that we use writing with a real life object instead of just a writing prompt out of a lakeshore box, like a real life something they are experiencing in the garden together. And oftentimes with this, actually we combined letter writing and persuasive writing. And I had a student write a letter for a grant for bird feeders. And we sent it and he got it. And then we had tons of bird feeders because he wrote such a good persuasive letter about the birds that we were doing our unit on. So you could actually deliver these letters and the kids might notice the difference. I'll show you, 2 more quick things I want to show you. before we skip to the end here, is that with writing, remember these prompts could be as simple as fill in the blanks. For your narrative, your persuasive, your informational, it could all have sentence frames with just fill in the blank for one word. And here's another example of a sort of poem where you fill in the blank one word. And then, an increasing complexity and increasing independence, you could give sentence frames where you only give them one word. Maybe you give them first, next, then last to structure their writing before you move on to giving them a mind map to do all on their own. So when you receive this presentation, you'll see a handful of different prompts for narrative writing that you can do out in the garden, including putting googly eyes on a rock and calling that the character of your story, or having a hula hoop on the ground and that being the entire setting of your story. These are different ways that you can prompt students to do writing out in the garden. This is a really sweet one that I think we'll end on. This is one of our letter writing, and he did not quite grasp the concept of having the heading and the ending, but it was so sweet that here is another reason why it's so important to do writing in the garden and in the kitchen classroom. It's a way for students to convey important ideas like this and to be able to communicate them to farmers. We sent this to our farmer right after this. So this letter says, "Thank you for giving us fruit. I now know that ice cream comes from cows. I wish I could go see you. I wish I can go see you growing vegetables. I wish I can see one of your ducks. Thank you for giving us fruits and vegetables. All of the farmers in the world are awesome. That's why I thank you." So sweet. This was right after we made ice cream in a Ziploc bag and put sliced strawberries in it to celebrate the first strawberries of the spring season. They were from Ben Mueller at Mueller Family Farms. And it was really sweet to see kids using what they're reading and their writing to communicate in a meaningful way. And that's why we do this sort of work, is to not only teach kids the standards, but to give them opportunities to engage with the classroom in a language-rich environment in a way that's comfortable for them, but to give them ways to engage in the broader community around them so that they can read all of the books that they want to read and write all